Good afternoon. Thanks for attending at the end of the conference. I know it gets a little tough. You get a little weary. I've heard a lot of content. I think this is an exciting topic, though. I'm David Levine. I'm the global leader for the digital transformation group at New Era Technology. I was one of the owners of Fusion Alliance, which we've been a sponsor for 9 years. So you may know us as Fusion Alliance, but we're now part of New Era Technology. This is my favorite conference that I do every year. I love this conference. I learn a ton. My clients learn a ton. It makes my job with my clients a lot easier because they learn a lot here. So I can do a little bit less education with some of them than I need to. This is session 21E. And Tracy's going to lead this session. If you have questions, we're going to ask you to hold them till the end. If you're attending virtually, please put your questions into the Whova app, and we have a poll that's out there. If you haven't answered the questions in the poll and you could do that, that would be great. And we'll talk about those results as well. All right, Tracy, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here so late in the day. I really appreciate it, especially on the last day. So just to introduce myself, I'm Tracy Jones. I work for Guidehouse. I do a lot of data strategy, governance, management. But I'm really passionate about data ethics. That and my Cocker Spaniel are like the two things that I most care about. And so I'm really excited to be here today and talk with you all. Just for your awareness, when this first started, I was really planning on speaking mostly just on data ethics more broadly, but we really can't have the conversation about data without also talking about machine learning, AI, the digital space in which all data is going back and forth, and then all the transformational technology. So it's a little bit expanded. This is the agenda. So we're going to spend the first little bit kind of mapping out the data terrain just to make sure we're on the same page. I know there's some folks that are complete experts here, and then maybe some folks who are just starting to kind of dip their toe into data ethics and AI ethics. So just want to have some introductory stuff. And then we'll dive into some cautionary tales, which are a sampling of things that are happening in the real world just for us to think about and learn from. And then we'll go into the survival guide, which was like the reason why I thought of the survival guide is because I almost went off a cliff once, and I thought, ooh, I should read a survival guide. Okay, so first mapping out the data terrain. So Jeff Weiner said, Jeff powers everything, that data powers everything that we do. We've all heard the term data is oil and AI is electricity. I really, just because of how big it's becoming, I'm really starting to think of it more as oxygen because we use it for just every function that we do. We're in it 24/7. We're doing it unconsciously all the time, which presents a lot of actual extra risk. And I don't know, I read a statistic that said the average person touches their cell phone 80 times a day. So that's 80 little points of information going out about us constantly, our geolocation, our biometrics, all the information that companies keep on us. So we're just living in an ecosystem of data. And so I had a question, and I hope everyone has already answered. If you haven't voted, if you want to go ahead and vote for your answer. Has everyone voted? I see people pecking.
Is it in the polls?
It's in the polls. Okay, I saw the numbers just change a little bit. Ready? Okay. Oh, wow. You all are super positive. So do you believe that data and AI provide a net benefit or a net cost? 56 out of 64 said net benefit, and 8 out of 64 said net cost. So you all are a super positive bunch. That's interesting. Okay, so I definitely agree. There's a ton of benefits that come with AI. I'm really excited about the things that it can do as far as creating more sustainable cities, helping to solve the environmental problems, saving us from the environment problems as things heat up. All of the improvements that we can have with customer service. But I also think there's a lot of potential negative that can happen. And we are already seeing some of this, but it'll really just depend on how fast it goes. There's a ton of bias still out there, and we'll talk a little bit about how some of the generative AI is actually exacerbating it. A lot of increased surveillance, and we've seen some countries have issues with this, and this has come up. Cyber attacks are getting stronger because they're using AI, and we are kind of like in a risky situation because we're so dependent on the technologies. If those that get infiltrated, it puts us at additional risk. And then a lot of deep fakes, misinformation on the web. So it could go at this point either way. I really think we're at an inflection point, and the behaviors that we take on now are really going to determine where we end up, if it's really more of a heaven or if we've created kind of a matrix hell for ourselves, to be determined by our behaviors. So let's briefly talk about what it means when we talk about ethical behavior. So when I talk about data, it's all information that we use to make decisions, that we're analyzing, that we're calculating. And when we talk about data ethics, we're talking about the behaviors that we have with data and the moral conundrums that we have. And really, we're talking about appropriate use. So old school, just a few years ago, when I was working on a data ethics project, we were really just looking at the data life cycle and what decisions are we making throughout the life cycle. But now we have to think about data ethics in terms of the algorithms that are also potentially producing bias and having efficacy issues, and the digital space in which we're all transferring information back and forth, and how we're interacting in the digital space with others. And then also all the responsible transformations, those things that are being driven with data, and are those really driving public good or causing more harm? So I just want to very briefly touch on the life cycle. I actually like the data life cycle that's more circular. I just couldn't fit it on the screen, so I used the caterpillar approach. And just want to point out that within the life cycle, any phase can be iterative, so we may be repeating within a phase multiple times, asking questions, and it can also be non-sequential. So depending on the outcomes at any given point, you may have to go back. So what I would say right now is a lot of times when I see folks working on data products or beginning an AI initiative, a lot of times they start with wanting to analyze, and they ask the question, what data do we have that we can already use? But especially in the situation where we're developing AI and it's so data hungry and it requires so much data, and for the data to be accurate in order to provide accurate results and non-biased results, it's even more critical to really start at the planning phase and to ask the question, what problem are we really trying to solve? What is the risk? Who should be involved? What data do we need to solve this problem? What does that ideal data set look like? How do we go about getting it? And then, of course, following all of the ethical considerations throughout the entire process. When we think of it in terms of the applying ethics to the life cycle, I just talked a little bit about the data piece of it, but the algorithmic piece is also very important. And as you know, there's tons of different learning models that can be used in different ways to manipulate algorithms and the weighting of things in order to get different results. So really working with a team of data scientists at that point is extremely important, as well as with the business folks, to understand the data better and what you're trying to solve for. And I would also say this is where it becomes critical to have a lot of different testing. So for example, subpopulation bias testing to understand what the results are from various parts of the population, maybe looking at your outliers, maybe doing some adversarial modeling to try to suss out the bias or any other problems before you go into launch. And then you go into launch. And this is where a lot of organizations stop and they just claim success. We've launched, it's working, it's awesome. But it really is not supposed to be that way. So truly, because everything's based on data, if you launch and your population distribution is at all different from the training data distribution that you train the model on, your model is going to be putting out incorrect results. Or over time, maybe the population changes. Or maybe you take maybe you take a model that was developed on one region of the country, but then when you apply it to another region, it no longer works. So we need to be continuously looking at the results of our models and assessing them, understanding what the outcomes are, what the impacts are to those that are using it, and then taking those learnings and flipping it back. It kind of becomes the flywheel approach of you go back, you improve your data, you improve the model, you relaunch. That typically doesn't happen. Actually, I was just having, at lunch, I was asking a person who I know works in AI in government. I said, how often are you reassessing? He said about 15 years. But that's actually very common, right? Now, some of the more newer companies are doing it more often, but a lot of them are not. And we'll talk about an example where serious decisions were made on people and no one audited it for 12 years. Okay, so this is probably really obvious, but the terrain of data is much more complex. So what I mean by that is the data itself, it has to be bigger. It's, ML and AI are super hungry, so getting that data is hard. Collecting it is expensive. If you buy it, do you know what you're buying? Does it actually, can you match it to your data? Does it match the population that you're trying to solve for? If you create synthetic data, do you have a data scientist who understands what they're doing? Because you have to create a data set that mimics the real data and has the same statistical attributes, but with different data points. So you need someone who knows what they're doing in order to do that. Also, the algorithms themselves, so many options. You need someone who's trained and also working with the business side. And then there's the ongoing issues that we're now seeing with transparency and explainability, because we're really starting to rely on generative AI, which is a little bit of a black box, or a lot of a black box. It's magical, but it makes things easier, but you can't necessarily explain it. So that makes it more complicated. And then there's the human side. So humans are complex, right? We can talk about things at a very high level: fairness, justice, happiness, but then we're all actually going to, in application, look at them different, think about them differently. We all have different risk comfort zones. Mine's very low, some people's very high. We also have different priorities in the way that we value things. So complexity. Complexity drives risk, but that's not it. There's a lot more driving risk in our situation right now. One of the things that I think is the most risky is that there's a really low barrier to entry with data and AI, right? Anyone can sit at their sofa and mess with something like Teachable Machine or Data.IQ and actually spin up, their own products. They can create videos, they can create fakes. It's pretty amazing that we have this much power. And I don't think what people sometimes appreciate is that it takes a lot of knowledge to actually do it correctly. And not just to do it correctly, but to actually think through the ethical ramifications of what we're doing and what we're putting out there and who might see it or use it or somehow be impacted by it. And then there's a big gap in regulations and guidance. There's a false sense of security because everyone else is doing it. No one's dying, no one's losing limbs right now. The pressure to compete is extremely high, and which is true. If you don't compete, if you're not producing AI, you also may not survive. So you should feel pressure in that respect, but it does drive a risk. There's the pride of personal investment, which I think really ties into one of the use cases I'm going to show you, and then a lack of auditing and oversight. So how are we addressing this huge risk on the global scale? So right now, about 70 countries have some type of AI strategy or plan. And they all have about the same types of things. They have principles, they have their overall vision. So China wants to be a leader. France and the EU really care about protecting people and the human side. Canada really cares about training and bringing in the best people to do AI. From an ethical perspective, but what I would say is all of those things really lack a good regulatory teeth right now, so that's missing. But from an ethical perspective, I've put up on the board a few of the things that I personally really like. So the EU data ethics framework sorry, I missaid that. The EU's GDPR and the ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI, both fantastic. I think the GDPR was literally game-changing for us. And the ethics, the trustworthy AI has a wonderful companion document with an assessment checklist that you can use. Highly recommend. Another great read is the Singapore Model AI Governance Framework. It's a very easy read, but they try to give some guidance there. Now, in the United States, we have a little bit more of what I would call a gap. So we do have the federal AI innovation site, and if you go there, it says that we have a strategy, but our strategy is multiple other documents. So it points you to about 50 other documents and says, this is our strategy, which is extremely time-consuming to go through, because I've tried to go through a lot of those documents, and doesn't really give you a super great guide to go by. We also have the Federal Data Ethics Framework and the President's Blueprint for Ethical AI. But those things don't really have any type of regulatory teeth, right? So there's a huge gap. And in the United States, what kind of fills the gap is the states leaning in, Google and other big companies leaning in and regulating themselves with the lack of regulation. States like Virginia and California setting up, privacy rights. We recently had New York City Law 144, where they're putting into effect, or they just put into effect, that you cannot use AI in the resume scanning and selection unless it's been audited. One thing that I do think is great that's coming, and it's not in the United States, but in the EU, they did pass at the European Parliament the AI Act. Now, it's going to still be a long time before it goes into effect, and I don't know how they're going to implement it, but I think it's awesome that they're trying, because in this environment, you have to start trying something somewhere, and we're most likely going to fail a few times, but we have to get started. So that's where we are. So cautionary tales. This is just a handful of examples. I just wanted to provide some different viewpoints to think about. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try to distill everything down really quickly, hopefully understandably, and then provide the so what do we care about. So COMPAS. This is a use case in mathematical fairness. Now, there are a lot of tools like COMPAS used in the judicial system. This is just one example, but it was such a big public case that I felt really comfortable using it, because I'm not throwing anyone under a bus, because there's been books written on it, right? So COMPAS was a tool that was used pre-trial to determine someone's level of risk of recommitting an offense. And then the judges used it to determine if a person should be incarcerated and go to jail and be separated from their family and taken out of the economy, or if they should be released on bail. So COMPAS would absolutely say that it's mathematically impossible for its algorithm to be biased. And the reason why they say that is it is based on the understood tenet of everyone's treated equally under the law. So everyone's treated equally under the law. They set their algorithm up to mimic that. So what that means is they collect over 100 data points on each person. They put them through the exact same model with the exact same calibrations and weightings. And then they're put up against a risk scoring board, 1 to 10, that is also calibrated, meaning each score means the exact same thing and each time. So 1 is always low, 10 is always high. So years later, this is used for years and years and years, and some states used it for 15 years and never got around to auditing it, which we just talked about. But a journalist from ProPublica happened to do an investigation, and when she was researching it, she saw that black men were oftentimes given much higher risk scores than white men. And so she got a team together. They dug through thousands and thousands of individuals and all of their data. It took them over a year, and what they found was 61% of the time, so 61% of the time, Compass was correct, and it gave people the right risk score, and the judge was able to use that information correctly. Okay, 39% of the time, it was wrong. And that 39% of the time it was wrong, it was twice as likely to give a black man a high risk score, even though he did not reoffend, and twice as likely to give a white man a low risk score, even though he did reoffend. So there was a huge blow up in the media and also between data scientists, and everyone was trying to talk about fairness. And Compass really defended themselves and said, we used our definition of fairness. This is fairness to us. Other people have other definitions, but this tool is still in place, right? It's just been renamed, and there's a lot of tools like it. So the discussion is not over, it's still happening. But the reason I bring it up today is for two reasons. One, it's more of just like a statement of, as a society, we should try to do better and think about fairness in different ways, because this type of risk assessment impacts a lot of people. The other thing is, as people who work in government and different organizations, we sometimes create different risk assessments that we put customers through, whether it be insurance, right, or banking, like what type of a risk do they carry? Are they going to get a loan? And the reason why I just bring it up is like we should be willing to have really detailed conversations about how are we describing the different principles that we're applying, so maybe fairness and other principles. How are we representing those in the algorithms? And then when we get the results, can we look at those results and feel comfortable with them? Or do we feel like we could explain that to the public? That's just one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss that one. Okay, next one, ChatGPT. Can't be at a conference right now and not talk about ChatGPT. It's so huge. So ironically, I'm not even going to talk about all of the different amazing things happening with, large language models and generative AI. This is really basic. ChatGPT takes in information. Anything that it takes in becomes a future output for someone else's search. That's how it works. It's a training model built on us. we are the data that it's training on. In June 2023, a company called Cyberhaven was doing some analysis, found that about 10% of employees are using ChatGPT at work. And I was like, oh, that's no big deal. But 90% of that 10% is putting company information into the tool. And then 50% of that 10% is putting in sensitive and confidential information into the tool. And I can imagine it happens very easily, right? You're a doctor, you're writing a letter, you want it to be better, you put it in, it gives you an output, you don't realize it's feeding a system. But it's happening a lot, and Cyberhaven actually estimates that 11% of new content, because now it's basically feeding on the stuff that we put in. So 11% of the new content is sensitive or confidential. So we're, in data management, we're talking oftentimes to clients about how is their data protected within all of their different systems. And they're creating passwords and all these different layers of protection. But the most basic of things, ChatGPT, is really a high risk for everyone. So why do I bring this up? One, we should all be conscious of what we're doing. Data has largely become unconscious for us, like you're breathing air, but sometimes you need to be aware that you're breathing. And then as organizations, we also need to be really clear to the staff, to the people that we work with, of appropriate use and potentially just block it. My company blocks it. Trace together. This is a super interesting one. So Singapore dealt with COVID really well, better than most countries, and they used a set of technologies. It was about 3, Trace Together being one. It was an app, and basically, if I have it turned on and you have it turned on and we're close together, it'll know that like you came in contact with me. The government really encouraged everyone to use it, and they said they were going to require it. The government also said that they were not going to use the information for anything other than tracking COVID and preventing COVID. So at one point, 80% of the population was using Trace Together. 80%. And then it turned out it was shared. They couldn't stop it from being shared. The police used it to do investigations, and it was used in at least one murder trial as evidence. So this really just brings up a few different issues. One, there's a ton of data being collected about us all the time. There's the risk of surveillance. There's also the importance of trust and organizations being as clear as possible about how data can be used. I guarantee you the person who was doing Trace together and collecting the data probably had no intention of sharing it. It was not an intentional misguidance, I don't think. But I think what happened was there was no laws or barriers within the organization to prevent anyone else from requesting it, and when the police requested it, they got it. So I just think it's important for us just to recognize on a number of ways that this is happening. And I don't know. I'm not telling you not to use apps. I still use them. I'm just saying we should be aware. Oh, it's not. Oh, I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay. Stable diffusion. This is my last example, and I'll try to get through it really quickly. I'm really grateful to the Symposium for letting me switch this out because I put it in at the last minute because I thought it was more impactful than one of the other ones I had in here. So stable diffusion is a text-to-image AI generative tool, and it uses the largest open bank of images available on the web. I forget the name of it. It's an acronym. It has 5 billion images in it. So it's a text-to-image tool. It uses a huge bank of open images. And Stable Diffusion itself, it produces images based upon your request. You can describe what you want, it gives it to you, right? It's used by other big companies like Canva. I don't know if you all know what Canva is. It basically allows you to create your own marketing and content. It's really, I'm so sorry, I'm yawning too. It's really fun and usable. I use it. I use Canva. Canva uses Stable Diffusion. This is one of the reasons why it went in, is I was like, this is an oh shit moment. So Bloomberg did a study on Stable Diffusion. They asked it for 5,100 images. And how they did that is they decided on 14 jobs, 7 being high paying, 7 being low paying. They then asked for 300 images from lawyer. Give me a lawyer, give me a lawyer, give me a lawyer. 300 images of a cashier. Give me a cashier, 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 300 times. What came back was horrifying. It didn't just repeat back to us our bias. It greatly exacerbated it. So, pictures of high-paying jobs were mostly fair-skinned and mostly male. Pictures of low-paying jobs were mostly darker skin tones and both males and females. Also, females were much less represented. So for every one picture of a female, there was 3 males within the 5,100. And also the distribution of females for actual jobs was way off. So in the United States, about 34% of judges are female. Guess how many judges it predicted as female using this tool? 3%. 3% compared to 34%. So this tool is producing images that then a bunch of marketing firms and Canva and me and other people are using without any kind of awareness. The reason why I bring it up, well, and I will say, Stable Diffusion's trying to address it, Canva's trying to address it, but even if they do, there's still a ton of other companies like this using generative AI, and we all want fast solutions, and we want these things that are better. So I'm just bringing it up because this type of technology, not only do we use as individuals, but we use as companies, and are sometimes also baked into other products that we actually pay for. I don't know of a lot of assessments that are happening, but it's something that I believe in. We should be assessing ourselves and assessing what our companies are using, because this is potentially catastrophic if the web is infiltrated with very biased information. That's how people learn, especially as kids, what they're going to be when they grow up. So survival guide. So I don't think it matters how strong we are right now, if we do not have the ability to be agile and to transform how we are behaving in our environment, we're going to hurt ourselves. I don't know if we'll become extinct, but we're definitely not going to be in a great situation. So I have this other question now. Is your organization in a position to survive and thrive with data and AI over the next 5 years? I have to get out of here. How do I get to this one? Okay. Hole. Is everyone done? Okay. So 25 out of 59 say you're going to be thriving. 32 out of 59 think they're still going to be around. 6 out of 59 say the future is uncertain. That's still pretty good. You all have a lot of faith, man. I'm just like impressed by how positive you are. Wow. Okay, so a little backstory. I went hiking with a friend. We were on Mount Rainier. It was icy. There was a sign. The sign says, narrow road ahead. But it looked really wide. So in my defense, I just thought the person who wrote the sign was stupid. And we went on our merry way, and we started down this path. And when we got around the mountain, the path got narrower and narrower and narrower. And I realized that I was going to fall and die. So I wanted to turn around. But a bunch of other people who also didn't believe the sign had followed us, and they refused to turn around. So I'm stuck on the side of a mountain. So then I cry. I'm a crier. A woman decided to go around me. She lost her footing, and I watched her slide down the mountain. Then she went off the end, went up in the air, and then out of sight. And then I was like, hell no, I'm not dying. I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled, because sometimes when you are in a survival situation, you crawl and you just hang on for dear life. That's what you do. I survived, found out she survived. We're all fine. But I walked away from that experience being like, I need to not be so stupid. I need a survival guide. Why was I there? I didn't have on the right equipment. I didn't even have on the right shoes, to be honest. I didn't know the terrain. I was blindly following someone else who thought that they knew what they were doing. Like, so many things gone wrong. But that's exactly what I think is happening in our society right now. We're just doing a lot of things wrong, but we're not getting hurt yet. So we just keep going. So we're going to talk about framing the mindset, setting direction, collaboration, disciplines, and the tools and resources that you need to get started. So I know because I also have this type of mindset, as like I sometimes don't have time, I don't have resources, it's someone else's responsibility. I think it's all our responsibility, and ultimately, these are just reasons, but that doesn't mean they're good reasons. Okay, frame mindset. So this is really basic, but I think it's really important. There are a lot of people who advertise AI is easy, or this aspect of something's easy. Maybe a little piece of it is easy, but when you start thinking about all the things that you need to do as an organization to do it right, it gets extremely complex and extremely hard. So I think the first and most important thing is to have the right mindset, because if you don't have the right mindset, then you just walk off the cliff like I did. All the data gathering and the AI modeling is the mountain itself. It's a difficult thing that we have to accomplish. But on top of that, we have all of these other challenges that we have to face. We don't necessarily have the right skill sets within our organizations. There's a lack of communication. There's market pressure. There's differences of opinion of what is even right and wrong. And there's a lack of regulation. So it is a lot of challenges. And when we think about, I'm working on something, how dangerous is it? We should really be gauging not just value to the organization, but also risk, and then applying appropriate behaviors based on that value-risk combination. So for example, if something is low value and high risk, you should really just be asking yourself, should our organization be doing this at all? Why are we doing this? If something is high value and high risk, then maybe you do it, but you apply extra precautions. You have people involved early on You're doing a lot more testing of the data. You're having it maybe go through an ethics review board. So applying appropriate action based on risk. And it's not just the risk that you think you foresee. It's also, what does your public, what does your customer, what does your constituent believe is the risk level? Gartner, in one of their articles, I just thought it was interesting that they said 30% of major organizations will use the Voice of Society metric by 2024 to assess their performance. So we can't just see these topics through our eyes, we have to see it through our customers' eyes. Okay, setting direction. So this seems super simple, right? Lead. It's actually, I feel like right now, not that simple, because a lot of people don't even know where data and AI necessarily live within their organization. Does the CDO own AI, or is it the product team, or does it belong in the technology group? So I think it's really important for organizations, for the leadership to get together and have a common vision and really lead by example. Or if you happen to be that owner, if you happen to be that voice, to know that you have to put your vision out there and you have to really advocate over and over. And if you think about, someone out in the jungle or the rainforest or whatever, they're referring to a compass not just once, they're referring to it multiple times. They don't take its guidance once, then walk 200 miles, then check it again. It's like a constant thing. So leadership needs to constantly be putting their message out there. Yeah. Okay. I've noticed in this conference, and I did not notice it until I came here, and so the word governance is on the screen. However, I'm going to stick to it, okay? And the reason why I'm going to stick to it is because I do think that we should enable people. I do think that we should have all of these, great connection points, but responsibility is also something that we can't get away from, and I think governance kind of really touches on that oversight and responsibility piece. Now, I'm not saying that governance of AI has to be, old school, traditional, all these different layers and super complicated. It can look different. So for example, maybe your organization sets up an ethical framework that has really clear principles, really clear practices laid out of what is the correct actions to take. And from that, it has a checklist. You trust your people, you train them, you trust them, you let them work in groups together, but then you have validation and oversight mechanisms. So maybe at certain points in the process, it's reviewed by an ethical review board or by someone else in the organization who understands the issue and who understands statistics and algorithms. So we definitely need governance, but it doesn't have to look the old traditional way. These are just some ethical frameworks. If you wanted to look at them as just like a starting place, they're some of the ones that I like. So now we're going to talk about fostering collaboration. Okay. We've talked about data a lot and AI a lot, but really humans are the most important piece. And they're a part of the design. They're the ones who are using the tools once we create it. So it's really important to engage and cultivate staff, to build those diverse teams, to potentially involve them in the creation of the ethics framework and what the principles are, to include them in conversations and use cases, to really suss out what are the different opinions on things and how can we look at things different, what types of questions should we be asking. And then to also involve impacted populations, because if you're developing a tool or a product that impacts, people, then getting their input, especially if they're vulnerable portions of the population. So I had mentioned, getting folks involved on the ethic principles, and this is just like the ones that keep appearing everywhere, but really having more details in your organization about what does it mean for your organization and the guide points for your organization are really critical. And then safe reporting. So within an organization, there should be a way for people to report if they think something is unethical. That doesn't mean they're always going to be right. I mean, it's not black and white, it's multiple shades of gray. So they may end up not being found to be correct, but they should have a way to report and they should feel safe doing that. And we should be willing to hear criticisms, because only if we can hear it are we ever going to be able to really improve ourselves. Incorporating feed loops process as much as possible into the actual development. I think we should start putting it into the performance reviews and requirements. And the reason why I say that is oftentimes in organizations, the times that you really talk and get feedback and direction is during performance reviews. And so, recognizing that this is important, making at least a couple times a year where you're talking about it with staff. And then conducting impact assessments. We do impact assessments for environmental issues. We do impact assessments for other, large things that impact society. But oftentimes we don't think about using it for the AI products and data products that we're putting out there. But it's an important way to get feedback. So disciplines. I've attended several sessions these past few days on training. Very much agree in the importance of training, not just of ethical training, but I think especially with data and AI, you have to know how to do it correctly. So having the certifications and the skills and the understanding of the data science and the different tools and techniques is super important. Not everyone in the organization needs the same level of training, so having a data literacy program that really looks at the different needs of the organization and providing training based on that, but making sure that everyone at least has the fundamentals so that if they're involved in a conversation, they understand the fundamentals. So some ideas, how am I doing? Okay, some ideas on ways to get people talking. Community of practices are great. Having use cases, which we already talked about. You can host events. You can have, a show and tell, demos. You can have roundtable discussions. All different types of ideas, but basically getting people together to talk about and discuss and learn from each other. Okay, so tools and resources. These are some tools and resources that I believe are really just great ideas and would be helpful. We oftentimes think of an IT help desk, but if your organization is big enough, really thinking about also providing a data science or AI help desk, because there are some organizations that are doing it in little pieces of their organization, and they may or may not actually have the expertise. It would be really great to have a core group of people that you could go back and butt things up against, get their opinion, role play, ask some questions, give you some algorithmic considerations. Ethical review boards. We've seen ethical review boards in universities and in research organizations, but really the products that we're producing as governments and the products that we're producing as public sector are enormously impactful. We could take another step forward and actually have ethic review boards. The creation and use of risk assessment tools. These could be tools that are made in advance that you share with your teams, and before something is launched, you go through a risk assessment tool. Playbooks, checklists, code repositories. There's a lot of options out there that are free that have coding information. I know What If from, I believe, Google has some free stuff, and then there's an IBM site. It used to be called AI Fairness 360, but now it's labeled something else, but if you look it up, it'll still go there. That provides great materials. So finding those sets of materials that help people is also something you could do. And then a personal favorite of mine is I sometimes read the boring stuff like the GDPR, and I gotta tell you, it's a slog, right? So having those cliff notes, because it's really important, we all need to read it, but good luck handing someone a stack of papers like this and be find the important stuff. No, so having cliff notes. You could even add cartoons, right? People love cartoons. Ways to make it engaging. Z-Inspection is another tool that I like. It's actually really cool because it was created by universities and it walks you through an assessment framework. Ironically, it uses the EU's trustworthy AI sort of framework as part of their assessment, so I like it. I also love the Alan Turing Institute. I love the AI podcast. The Alan Turing Institute's really amazing. They have tons of research. You can go to fireside chats. You can listen to their podcasts. You can read tons of papers. It's a cool resource. And if I was giving someone a bunch of steps of how to get started, this would be it. This is very generalized. Of course, you could get more specific. So I'll let you take a picture. I'm not actually going to go into this in detail because I know you want to have time for questions. And here's some additional little resources at the end. Some of them have already been mentioned, but just so you have them. Okay, I'm happy to take. Oh, sure. This one? No, this one? Yes. That's an easy question. I'll take more of those.
All right.
Well, as you know, I'm from the Netherlands, so I'm in the middle of GDPR and so on. But still, we within our government, we have had a lot of trouble. I don't know if you know it, with child care support. That because the Parliament said we want fraud detection, everything went wrong according. A bit like the first example you gave us, and so many people went bankrupt because of this, and with all things happening. So, this framework, is it also possible for legacy? Because that is what I see. Data is we do it like 20, 25 years, and there's so much unethical in the things we already regulated and put in place and so on.
I think I know the example that you're talking about. When I was looking for surveillance examples, I actually was kind of debating about 4 different ones. One, which a lot of people had lost their funding and child resources because of the information that was required. There was another EU country that basically created this master computer, was pulling in information from a bunch of different programs and also external information. It was considered to be too surveillance-y by the EU, so it was shut down. I think this is something that we're just going to continue to grapple with, and it's going to be really challenging because ultimately, here's the conundrum. Governments want to solve problems because they're protecting people. They also want to prevent fraud because they're giving out, especially in the situation that you're talking about and in another situation, giving out tons of money for social services and had higher rates of fraud than they felt comfortable with, so we're starting to use these more surveillance-y techniques. But then on the other side, it's like people don't want to be surveillanced, and also oftentimes it's the vulnerable that end up having the most surveillance, right? Because, so I don't think there's an answer. I think it's gonna keep happening, and I think individual governments are going to work through and find out the right way kind of painfully. I'm really thankful because, I mean, at least in that situation, after it was reviewed, they recognized that, right? And then they shut it down in another situation before the same thing happened. I mean, yeah.
The stakes are so high, and the impact on human lives is so devastating. So, and exactly what you said, it takes 15 years for getting to know this kind of problem, and then how are you going to solve it? It's impossible. Yeah.
So thank you. I really appreciate it. The way you presented the information.
Yeah.
So a couple notes, and then I'll ask my question. One, I really appreciated that you differentiated between data ethics, AI ethics, digital ethics. I work in the healthcare space, and I'm trying to help people understand just because we have bioethics or medical ethics, number one, they're not the same, doesn't mean that same principles can be applied as to data or AI. So I appreciated that. So question for you, in this space, have you had experience or have you observed any organization actually having an ethics review framework applied? Not in theory. I know there are
No.
principles and guidance available, but is there an organization public or private, that has actually applied an ethics framework with an ethics review board? Because I've set up one, but
Yeah.
I'm looking for an example that's successful.
So I'm happy to open up the conversation so other people can share if they know of one. I do not. And I would say a lot of times I'm working with organizations and we're helping with data strategy and governance and management. And when I bring up ethical things, oftentimes it's a little bit pushed aside, or they say, oh, we're getting into generative AI, but we haven't figured out what we're doing with it yet. There's a guy working on it. So but I'm also working with organizations that are having, earlier discussions in the governance and data management. So, there might be some much more mature organizations. Yeah.
I think your answer's in the room, actually, because this room should be full. Because my observation is, you've provided great insights and a lot of practical steps. Oh, but I'm sorry, you provided great observations and practical steps, and this is a great presentation, by the way. This is my last one of the week, and it's one of my favorites. And my first one of the week was about sustainability, which was also one of my favorites. But that's the only two on two very critical topics that are getting no attention in the data and analytics space. So I think the answer to your question is if the room was full, I think more people would be working on this, because I think it's not getting a lot of attention. We actually have some survey data that says it's not. It's pretty lowly. And do you have any of the clients you work with, are they asking for this yet, or is that still? That was my question. I was going to get there eventually. You were waiting on me. He was going to take the mic away. But do you have any clients that are asking or interested in here, or is the recognition still very low?
So one client that I would say in the past couple of weeks, we had a conversation and they talked about how they're starting to talk about it, right? But they've not gotten very far. I had another client, very important client. We were developing a data strategy for them, and when we wanted to include ethics, they wanted to keep it out. So I would say it's I think it can. I think depending on the situation, though, it can. If you put it in a strategy and then you have to have goals associated with it, it can maybe bring up things that you don't want to be public. So I think there's different reasons. So not necessarily that they weren't going to focus on it, but they did not want it in their strategy or in their action plan. So.
Yeah. And just real quickly, and I think an indicator of that, if you look at request for proposal, be it in commercial side of the world or public sector, over the past few years, I've maybe have seen data ethics requested once or twice, and that's over hundreds of proposals. So to me, that's an indication that it's not getting enough attention.
Yeah.
And in bringing us full circle back to this whole symposium, I think this is part of the role of the chief data officer to elevate the importance of this as a key factor and how an organization becomes more data driven. And that's just one sort of final point I would put on this.
Yes. Well, I can add. We have ethical boards. The ethical board for the provinces in the Netherlands, the 12 provinces, is installed 2 months ago, and last month they actually released their first advice, which was about ChatGPT, and they presented the results in a webinar. Well, it had like 500 watchers, so it was very good received, and all over LinkedIn and so on, a lot of attention. And we have also in the major cities like Amsterdam, Eindhoven, Utrecht, they all have ethical boards, even with the ethical guy of Gartner. So yes, definitely.
Wow.
So my name is Vishal. I work for the state of Washington. for the state Medicaid agency. So
I used to live there. That's where I almost went off the mountain. I was on Mount Rainier. It was Mount Rainier. I almost died on that mountain twice, gosh darn it.
I'm glad the mountain taught you something.
I know.
So, this is a call because I know there are about 60 people online as well. We just established. I'm the chief data officer there. I just established the AI ethics committee for our agency in the month of January this year.
Awesome.
So we're on a learning journey. I'm here to ask for help. Help us. Participate with us. We want to collaborate. We have a fully functioning IRB in the state that we work with, but that's more around research, university and academic and otherwise public research. AI ethics is a related but different animal. And as we're developing this, putting this in place, would love to collaborate, learn together. Just a call for help.
I would love, yeah. Absolutely.
Anybody else? Anyone? All right, we've got some questions online.
And if anyone online knows, to his first question, where a good framework is, tell them to put it in as a question, the answer.
Okay, good. All right. What are your top 3 recommendations for organizations just beginning their data and AI ethics journey?
Top 3.
Top 3. Just 3.
Okay. Yeah. Number 1, use the survival guide. No, I'm joking. No, I think really, if you really are just getting started and you haven't done anything, I think having the Chat GPT discussion and really laying down the law with that is super important, because you could be losing really important information, and it could lead to other discussions, right? Because it's an introduction discussion. I think the second thing that I would recommend is working with other leadership and staff to develop the framework, because you need a guidepost that you can move against. And once you have your vision and a framework, then you can start creating communications, you can start the checklist, you can start having training, you can start working with groups and discussing, okay, how does this work in application? But I don't know where you start if you don't have a guidepost. And third, use the survival guide.
Very good. What organizations' roles and skills would you suggest on an ethical review board? How would this differ from data governance boards typically have business, IT, privacy, security, legal risk, etc.?
Can you read it again? How would an
What-
ethics review board be different than other boards?
What roles, skills, and would you suggest on an ethical review board?
So I think when you're doing research, the ethical review boards typically have people that really understand data science. They understand the different types of ways to look for bias, the different types of questions you should ask. So I'm not saying that the ethical review board should replace the other boards. I'm just saying you would probably need specific skills to specifically look at ethics and an understanding of what types of questions should be asked, and then be able to dig into both the data and the algorithmic side in order to assess if it's appropriate, if there's any additional risk or outcomes that we should be watching for, and to help determine how often it should be assessed once it's launched.
Can I add to that answer?
Yeah.
We just went through that.
Oh, okay. Fantastic.
So for us, we have a pretty good governance structure, and the AI ethics committee is actually part of the data governance structure. Governance talks about, can this be done? If yes, how should it be done so that it meets all the compliance, policy, and those parameters and guardrails? Ethics asks the question, should it be done in the first place? Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should, right? Is it right? Is it the right thing to do? And if yes, for whom, for what purpose, under what circumstances?
And are we doing it correctly if we are doing it?
Right. So that's why within the governance structure, an ethical perspective to that.
I like it. Next time we can present together.
All right, well, we're out of time. This was a small group, but you were certainly lively. I think the liveliest we've had from a question and a conviction standpoint. So great job. Appreciate it. Maybe next time it's a keynote instead of one of these kind of sessions so that you get the whole kind of community involved. I think that's probably the right place for it. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.